And with that, I think we'll transition into a few questions. Hopefully I answered many of the questions that were submitted ahead of time, but we'll just take a little break and launch into some Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Kraft. Yeah, there were many questions that were submitted ahead of time, and actually a lot of them were covered in either the comments or that presentation, but there are a few that came in through the Q&A. You touched upon this a little bit, but this was more specific, so I wanted to bring it up. During the NPR, particularly the float month of that rotation for fourth year, are residents going to have the opportunity to potentially pursue a global surgery experience?
So we haven't looked into that for the 1 month. We're just trying it out and trying to figure it out. And of course, global surgery has changed a little bit with COVID, so we'll have to see how that plays out. So for this coming academic year, the short answer is no, but I would love to have that be a possibility, and we have talked about that. So for future years, absolutely, we're very open to that.
Excellent. And there's some more questions coming in. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, just use the Q&A feature so we can address them. Next question we have here, and this is one that I can discuss a little bit in the resident session, but some comments from you all would be wonderful too. How do you support applicants who are applying, who are trying to do a couples match, but with urology being an early match? How do you support those situations?
So I always go to bat for everyone that's in that position. I recognize that that's a very challenging position to be in. We're very fortunate to have a lot of friends and colleagues and be well connected within the institution, and they're very understanding of our unique circumstances with our early match. So I always emphasize, let us know early, let us know your circumstances, because we're very happy to go to bat for you. And very often it works out.
Perfect. And then Ashley asked the question is, how many of our residents go on to do fellowship? Actually, Javier Santiago looked at the last 10 years of graduates, and we have the actual percentages and numbers in the next presentation, but they asked specifically interested in urologic oncology, and we have Dr. Palapattu and Dr. Hollenbeck here. So if you want to comment a little bit on that fellowship at Michigan, that might be helpful.
Dr. Hollenbeck, what would you say about our trainees doing urologic oncology?
I would say, well, urologic oncology in particular, it's, this year we have, I'd say it's about one every other year. If I had to guess, I'd say over the past 20 years, about 40% of our residents have pursued fellowship, 40 to 50% over 20 years is what I would say.
Yeah, in terms of urologic oncology training, I know this doesn't exactly get to the question about pursuing fellowship training, but I would say that what I didn't say earlier was our department is comprised of 5 clinical divisions: urologic oncology, neuropelvic reconstruction, pediatric urology, endourology, and andrology, general and community urology. Our urologic oncology group is composed of 12 fellowship-trained urologic oncology faculty. We are the largest urologic oncology group in the country after Memorial Sloan Kettering and MD Anderson. So our trainees as residents get a fairly exhaustive exposure to urologic oncology, particularly in their last year. We do in the state where we do many of the big cases, as well as very complex robotic and endoscopic urologic oncology. So your exposure is heavy and strong. So I'll leave it at that.
And then one more question before we move on to Dr. Santiago's talk. Would there be an opportunity to apply for K awards or other grant funding for the 6-year physician scientist position?
I'm going to let Dr. Hollenbeck talk about that.
I'll take that. Thank you for the question. So I appreciate the ambitiousness, and we do not discourage anything. If you're passionate about it and can get it done, yes. But what I would say is that, a 1-year lab experience, no matter what it is, it's uncommon that a 1-year lab experience will, whether it's translational or clinical research, be sufficient to hold sort of an independent position. But it certainly sets you up with a solid foundation to be competitive for all different types of grant awards, which include things such as urology care, foundation awards during that research period, potentially, NIH training awards through the postdoctoral fellowship mechanisms, and ultimately culminating with some type of career development award. So we certainly do believe that part of being a physician scientist is being independent and obtaining funding. And by all means, we have the playbook to do that successfully. We have more R1 funded faculty that are physicians than any other program in the country. You know, I've lost count, but I think it's close to 10 that have been R1 funded, and several with multiple R1s. So, you know, we do that very well, and we certainly are passionate about training the next generation of scientists as well as clinicians.
So there were some new questions coming. Actually, let me address the first one that was left over from the previous session. There's a question about how much clinical exposure and operational exposure do we get to transgender care and surgeries. Dr. Miriam Haj Musa does all the transgender care here. She's part of the AUH or andrology type rotation that we do in our third year. So you certainly get exposure, and you can ask if that's an area that you're particularly interested in to try to go to those cases over potentially other types of men's health or andrology cases. The other thing that came up this year with the elective is Dr. Kraft asked us, you know, what do we want to do during that month? And I actually we're in process of working with the plastic surgery department for my month to work with, you know, rotate through plastics essentially with their transgender care kind of exposure. And they now have like a dedicated transgender care fellow. So I think that's going to be a really interesting and unique opportunity, and something that, if it goes well, will obviously continue to be available to future residents. Let's see here. We have a couple other questions. Which attendings work with the most residents on research projects? How often in your experience do residents get involved in public health related research, given that U of M has a top public health school as well as a HSR center? I don't know if anybody who's on the call is like specifically on a public health project. I can definitely tell you that in the previous slide, the Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation, IHPI, a lot of our faculty work there, and they work closely with public health faculty and students. And so I think there's a number of projects that have a public health angle or evaluation. I'm trying to think who would be like the particular expert, but essentially anyone in that group would be able to get you plugged in, especially if you have ideas. It's particularly with it being like a health services research kind of stronghold. There's definitely a lot of connections to that sphere. And while I'm trying to, I don't know if anyone on this call is actively doing any of those types of projects, it certainly would be an opportunity that's there. And we have the people who work directly with that type of faculty. Like I know Dr. Elamudo, who does a lot of telehealth research, has worked directly with public health faculty in his grants and some of his other research. So we definitely have an avenue to get people connected. Another question we have is, how has COVID affected our experience as residents, and what was the urology department response to COVID? That's a really good question. It could take a while to answer, but in short, I was particularly impressed with the department's response super quickly before the numbers were even, just while they were expected to rise, before they were even rising inside the hospital. We quickly pivoted to a system where the residents were split in half. Half of people would be working from home and outside of the hospital, not using PPE, not having exposures. The other half would be rotating in kind of combined services. And I think that time really highlighted what Javi said, that the culture here is really impressive and people cover for each other. So chiefs who had not, ever expected to be holding the floor pager were covering the floor pager and console pager at night just to minimize exposures. So obviously there's a lot more that can go into this. We were overall very lucky to not reach the numbers that many other places experienced. I think we got up to like 260 at our peak. But the department's response and the health system's response was really impressive.
I just want to add too, not because it's necessarily related to our resident experience, but I just think it's really cool. And shows like the incorporation of the involvement of our urology faculty in leadership positions here. But just a couple noteworthy things. Dr. Roberts, who's one of our endo urologists and a very brilliant man, was like the czar of the response from a technology standpoint to COVID, and was part and drove the team that came up with a way, for example, to sanitize or sterilize the N95 masks for reuse. Just a really cool thing that. And then Dr. Miller, you know, had a very strong role in leading the whole hospital system. Dr. Ambani was part of the main crew that was leading the operative scheduling and planning. So it's just neat. You know, it's not necessarily my cup of tea, but I know there's people within our resident program who are interested in ultimately in how hospital leadership position. I don't know if Kyle's on right now, but just to be able to have these people who are, you know, running these like large scale institutions, particularly in a pandemic, there's a lot to learn from that. And if that's something you're interested in, a lot of people you can lean on for insight for future practice.
Awesome. Thanks, Javi. Lauren, I'm going to rope you into this one a little bit because you're going to be one of the rising chiefs. I think all the current chiefs are probably still operating because we're catching up on our backlog from COVID. But how comfortable do the graduating chiefs feel with various procedures and surgeries, including minimally invasive surgery and robotic?
Yeah, I think obviously I can't speak to that completely because I'm not a graduating chief yet, but just from hearing from them, I think they feel 100% comfortable with everything. I don't think there's anything that they feel like they're worried about going into, the ones that are going into private practice, especially, that they're worried about doing on their own. Yeah, what do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I agree. And then a couple more questions that we'll answer here. Can you speak to the progression of autonomy for the sake of letting other people talk? Do you want to jump in, or Lauren, if you give your perspective and we can add to it?
Yeah, I think there's a good progression. As Javi was talking about, we try to give an early exposure to open cases, especially, and that's been increased in the recent years with open surgery rotation and the ambulatory surgery rotation, so that you have a lot of times when you're a PGY2 that you're double scrubbed and kind of watching at that point more so, not as actively involved, but ready, but therefore more prepared when you are a 4 and a 5 and you're the main resident in those cases, that you're ready at that time. And then we'll often give the PGY2 the opportunity early on to do one side of the ureteral anastomosis or close the cystotomy or what have you. So I think that allows for a good progression of autonomy. And then you also have early exposure to robotics, even as early as a 1. You're starting out bedsiding and you're doing that as a 1 and a 2. And by the time you're a 2, you're going to be getting off the bedside already to do easier parts of the procedure, like taking down the bladder and a prostate. So that by the time you're a 4, you're going to be doing, a majority of a pyeloplasty, for example, almost skin to skin as a 4. And then as a 5, you're doing, a lot of the whole case. It's definitely attending dependent. We do have quite a few different attendings that have different philosophies in that regard. Some will kind of have you do one side and they're doing the other. But there are certain attendings that will have you do the entire case on the robot. So I think it's a good progression.
Yeah, I agree. And then there's progression of decision making too. So first year, you're getting the plans directly from your chiefs. And actually, I was pleasantly surprised. I remember as an intern that on rounds, the chiefs present the patient and the plan, as opposed to you presenting everything, because you just get all the information right from the get-go. But that quickly develops to second year. You're seeing consults independently, staffing directly with attendings, and for the most part, they like push you to say like, okay, what do you want to do? What's the plan? As a third year overnight, what I'm on right now, you're for the most part here alone, and you don't really have to call a faculty because you feel so comfortable from that progression, unless there's something that like surgically or procedurally needs to be managed. And that just continues even in how you chief services. So as a third year, you're the chief of the andrology service, which is primarily like 24-hour observation and general urology, 24-hour observation stays, patients that might have some medical comorbidities, but their surgical recovery is usually not that complex. And that continues to progress over 4th and 5th year too, where eventually you're taking care of some of the sickest patients in the hospital in oncology. And the next question, Can you go into a little more detail to what the relationship is like with fellows and attendings? I think our pictures hopefully show that we have a really good relationship with everyone here. I'm sure everyone's going to say that everywhere, and it's hard to show that when you're not physically here in person. But the fellows are typically adding to the educational experience and not taking away. In fact, one of the questions Dr. Kraft asks at every program evaluation meeting that we have, I think 4 times a year, is, are you guys losing out on educational opportunities due to the fellows? And that very rarely is an issue. And when it is, we get a chance to actually bring it up. The relationship with the attendings, there's like 45 or 50 attendings that can't even like keep count at this point. But still, they're very good relationships. Obviously, you're professional in the OR and on rounds. But as you saw, for those who were like joined early when we had the virtual open house started, but we weren't officially speaking yet, like Dr. Hollenbeck, I think, made fun of me for something, and Dr. Palapattu was just saying hello. So we definitely have very good relationships across the entire board between the residents and with the rest of the department.
Yeah, there's another way to exemplify that. I mean, I can't think of an attending that I would be afraid of calling. I guess I'll put it that way, from the very bottom to Dr. Palapattu, who's receptive to, text messages. I mean, it's just, it's a very easy group of attendings and fellows to communicate with, which is great. It doesn't feel like you're being punitively scared into, being like, never call me, or, it's a very good relationship, healthy relationship.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that and say that obviously with 50 attendings, you're not going to be best friends with all of them, but there's not a single one that I would, even think twice about. I think all 50 of them are saved in my phone, and I would comfortably text and call them at any time. And probably over half of them I would enjoy having a beer with. And
yeah.
Or have had.
Yeah, or have had
a beer.
Yes.
That's awesome. And then are there simulation exercises, laparoscopic or Da Vinci prep integrated into your training? And if so, do your clinical duties allow you to take advantage of them? As part of the incoming, actually, Cathy, is your volume on?
Yeah, so I was going to say, as part of your
intern curriculum?
Yeah, as part of your intern curriculum, as part of the Gen Surge year, they definitely have the open and the laparoscopic curriculum. So I think in the beginning of the year, you test. It's a very informal test, but just to get an understanding of where you are. And then I think a few months in, you have the laparoscopic test, and you're assigned a mentor. So mine was Dr. Ambani. It was very low key, but it's just, the STEM Center is open 24/7. And so whenever there were some slow lulls on my call days, I would go and practice, and it's open all the time. And since the laparoscopic curriculum is now finished, we can access the Da Vinci modules there as well. And so you can play around with it whenever you have time. And so our STEM Center is awesome. It's open all the time. And I think it's very easy to integrate into your training.
Awesome, thank you. And then I don't know how many of you guys got to see our Eurocribs YouTube video that we just tweeted about recently, but I didn't mention it on there, but there's a 24-hour simulation center right at like the door across a hallway from where our resident room is. And so I remember particularly intern year on the 24-hour general surgery calls, there are periods of time where things are very quiet, and you can just pop in there and jump on the robotic simulator, and you have a name already assigned, and you're able to kind of work through those exercises and being able to tell folks. That has not been formalized. I know there's been discussions about trying to make a curriculum for that as well, but in some ways you don't want everything to become too formal, because it's just more time in your schedule as well, that you'd have to find times either in the evenings or weekends to come in and do these like formal curriculums. But it's always there, it's always available, and people expect you to take advantage and use it. And when you do, you get rewarded. So I remember intern year at one point, I came into a case to like update a chief about something going on the floor, and things were quiet. And one of the attendings asked, "Hey, have you jumped on the simulator? Have you been using it?" And I said, "Yes." So then he said, "All right, perfect. Jump on the robot and like take down the bladder or take down these adhesions." So there's definitely opportunities there. And then two good anonymous questions. Dr. Kraft, and the prices.
One more quick thing on that too is that your night flow rotation is right before your MIS rotation. So that gives you a lot of time to practice for the upcoming rotation as a 3 when you have the most exposure to the robot. So.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Lauren. Dr. Kraft mentioned there are prices for seeing consults. What are these end of the year prices? LOL.
Good question.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. This is something that a lot of people get interested in, and very few other programs have been able to institute because it's purely like driven and financially supported by Dr. Juan, one of our pediatric urologists. So at the beginning of the year, we have an entire grand rounds dedicated to this, where the chiefs split up into teams with hilarious names, and then they draft a resident from every year. So a 4th year, a 3rd year, a 2nd year, because they're the ones that are seeing consults on urology. And then those teams, you log your consults throughout the year in a database. And each month we get a report of which team is winning, seeing the most consults, as well as like individually who's seeing the most consults. And then there's like fun prizes like Black Cloud, who saw the most consults in a day, who went to the OR 3 times in one day, things like that. And I forget what the numbers are, and they change year by year because the number of consults we see keeps going up. But the individual who sees the most consults ends up getting a laptop by Dr. Juan. I think like the category below that gets iPads. And then there's a lot of things that fall below that where there's urology specific books and other things that Dr. Juan will purchase for residents.
It's not the individual that sees the most consults. It's everyone that sees over a certain threshold of consults. So last year, I think all 4 of the 3s got, it's usually all the 3s that get a laptop. So probably one time during your residency, you'll get a nice $2,500 MacBook Pro laptop.
And then the next question is, will you be offering virtual away rotations this summer? We think so. We're really hoping that's the case. Dr. Barboglu is the clerkship director, and he's like pushing the medical school to give us the green light to be able to do this. The questions have been around whether this is something that's going to be able to provide like remote access to the medical records so that you can talk about real patients. And if that was the case, people would be able to potentially do virtual clinics like telehealth visits with the faculty. But if that doesn't get approved, we're still hoping to come up with some sort of curriculum or some sort of way for students to be able to interact with residents and faculty about, urology topics. I know there's other places that have already kind of shared what their virtual sub-Is have looked like, but we're trying to balance, making it actually useful for applicants and meeting people and not just kind of extra work as everyone returns to rotations.
And, as an aside from that, we'll plan on going forward over the next couple of months, just because I imagine, well, first of all, we haven't seen y'all's faces. So at the least, we want to at least be able to interact with you guys at a little bit more of a deeper level. So we'll be planning on having monthly hangouts of some degree, little happy hours in the evening. I don't have specific dates for you or times, but that's going to be something we're going to come up with in the next couple of weeks. But just a way for you guys, questions come up. You guys are going to be exposed to a lot of different programs. That's great. So you may have more questions as that occurs. And, but also just time for us to, again, this is pretty informal, but maybe even a more informal atmosphere, be able to ask some more personal questions
and where you can, be heard and seen.
Yeah. It's a little one-sided here.
One question here from Renee: did any of you do an away rotation at UMich as a med student? If so, what are some of the things that you took part in or learned that really boosted your interest in this program? This is a great question for Cathy, and then Javi can jump in after.
So I did an away rotation here, and I've heard really great things about the program, which is why I was interested in the first place. But kind of what we've been talking about in general, I think it's just the palpable culture where everyone seems to have each other's back. It's a very benign environment where you feel safe learning every day. That's to be expected of you. And that's definitely continued to be the case as my experience as an intern here, where when I showed up on the first day, they literally held my hand and taught me everything from ground zero. And it's just been a really great environment to learn, both in terms of clinical management, both to learn in the OR. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but in terms of OR 26 as an intern, I think it's a very special opportunity where you're in the OR by yourself. So you're not double scrubbing in water cases. You're the only resident in the room, taking full ownership of the patients, where in the beginning, you're getting more guidance from the attendings, obviously, but as you progress, the attendings start to look at you and ask what you would like to do and how you would like to approach things, which is very empowering. And I think that kind of continues throughout the 5 years here. And I've just felt very well supported from, you know, what I've seen during the away rotation, and that's definitely been the case as an intern as well.
You know, I think, truthfully, I think the most valuable thing I got from the away rotation, and I think this is going to pose an interesting challenge to you guys. It's not impossible, but it's definitely a challenge of some degree, is connecting with one of the obviously connecting with the residents, but connecting with the faculty members, or at least like one or two on a more deeper level. And maybe that's from, you know, hey, I'm interested in this particular research you're doing, or I've never been exposed to that at my home urology institution. I would love the chance to talk about it. I'd really think about ways you can try and engage people virtually in the next couple of months, and maybe try to schedule calls with faculty, just because it's really important to have somebody in your corner whenever you're going through the application process. It's going to be more difficult this year, you know, it's without having a lot of face time. That's a part of the challenge, but if you guys can and find a way to maybe connect with one or two faculty, I think that would be very beneficial.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Javi. What is the best way to find out when UMich will be hosting other virtual town halls, or kind of the monthly happy hours that we're hoping to schedule soon? One way is going to be Twitter. Unfortunately, it's like the easiest way to just get information out for everyone to see. So if you're not on there yet, which I think I've seen almost all your names on there, you know, feel free to join. That's the quickest way. We're also, I now finally know exactly who helps manage our website online. And so once we have these dates and more information, it's going to be posted directly on our University of Michigan residency page as well. So we'll have that kind of in multiple areas. A really good question for life in general. How's the dating life in Ann Arbor? How many of the residents are married and or have families? I think, Javi, did you look at the actual numbers?
I just did some calculations.
Some rigorous math.
So, yeah. Aided by a calculator. I want to be that. So about 20% of people are single. And then with regards to, I think somebody had asked related to kids. Next year, there are two. Well, maybe I shouldn't announce that. There will be 2 children within the urology program next year.
That's a secret. You can announce it.
This is a safe space.
I'm not going to specify who.
Here for 10 years now, so I know a bit about dating in Ann Arbor. I would say that, I mean, it's obviously a smaller city, so, you know, there's less people to meet, but I think, you know, being surrounded, like Juan said, being surrounded by like all the grad schools and everything, there's a lot of really interesting people to meet. So less people to meet, but I think it's actually like a pretty decent place to be single.
I came into
that could be my contribution.
I was going to say, I came into residency single, had fun dating for a little bit, ended up meeting my husband at the hospital, and then we got married last year and we're having a baby in a couple of months. So, and the other thing to be said about that, and then Adam is having a baby any day now, is that we have a really good maternity and paternity leave policy too through our HOA. So if your schedule allows, you can take up to 6 weeks of maternity leave and up to 2 weeks of paternity leave, which I think will actually be increased to 6 weeks of paternity leave as well, possibly with our next contract next year. That being said, with the with the AUA rules or the ABU rules, I'm only going to be able to take 4 weeks of maternity leave, but I'm going to be able to tack on 2 weeks of vacation. And with 4 weeks of vacation, you can take 6 weeks in a row and then still have an additional 2 weeks of vacation. So that's another kind of benefit of Michigan.
Yep, agreed. This is a good and tough question. Best, worst thing about Michigan. The best, we have said it multiple times, so I hate to sound like a broken record, but it really is the culture and the people here. And you've heard that from Palapattu down now to where only the residents are here and no one's forcing us to say that. Worst thing is 100% have to be honest, is the weather in the winter. That's just a challenging time, particularly if you come from somewhere really warm, because it's just harder to you can't just go outside and find stuff to do. Like we just played spike ball last weekend together. The other day for Memorial Day, we went out to a lake and we're out on kayaks. Obviously that all becomes much more challenging when it's really cold out and everything's frozen. We still find times to like get together, spend time together in and out of the hospital, but it's all indoors. And so some people really struggle with that. I like steal my energy from other human beings, so I have no problem at all. But I know that's not the case for a lot of people. I don't know if anybody else wants to offer some.
I will say, coming from South Florida and not being used to winter at all, it was pretty difficult. But it is pretty easy to settle in with the group of people that you have. So just like Juan, I suck. I'm an energy vampire. I just like to be around people. So I think that's you can easily combat those things, but it is pretty cold. So if you're from the South, you know, Javi and I both from the South, Kyle from the South, you can manage. It's really not that big of a deal.
The other thing I'll just say there, I agree with, you know, the first thing I thought of initially with best thing about Michigan is the culture. And it sounds like, I apologize for coming a little bit late. I got done with cases a little bit late, but so it's probably been said multiple times, but culture definitely is great here. In terms of one of the worst things, and this is something I will often tell applicants on our interview day, is, you know, we are a very clinically busy program, so you are going to be busy, and I think sometimes it can be hard, but we're also, you know, a big research powerhouse, but we don't have a research year. So sometimes it can be hard to find time in your schedule to balance all the clinical requirements you have, practicing, going to the sim center, et cetera, with doing research. And, you know, we're a very academically busy program, so there's an expectation that you do research and have projects and present things. So sometimes it does mean doing it, you know, at nights, weekends. I will say that it's changing a little bit in the sense that last year we instituted a mandatory half day of research for the third and the fourth year residents, with the idea being that you can work on manuscripts or, you know, schedule meetings with statisticians or other people who are only available during normal business hours. So I think it is changing a little bit, but it sometimes can be a challenge to try to balance, you know, being productive, having lots of research without having a research year like some other programs do.
And then I'll just add one thing to that as well. I don't know if the question was regarding the state of Michigan or our program. I'm interpreting it as our program, but because agreed with this, the weather being the worst thing about the state. But in terms of our program, I think one of those blessing and a curse things is the fact that we do have 50 attending. So you get to see a lot of ways of doing things, but at the same time, it can be hard to parse them all apart sometimes and remember preferences, and you don't get quite as much of maybe that mentorship model that you might see in other programs. However, I do think our program does a good job of breaking you down into rotations so that you get some of that within a big program. So in our lap endo rotation, there are 5 attendings that you're working with. On peds, it's a smaller group, that kind of thing. But that would be something to just kind of consider. And then, yes, the culture has been said 100 times. But I also think just the amount of money our program has and the resources that are available are kind of unparalleled. So the funding we get to go to conferences, to have whatever food we want, and all of these meetings, to get support for research. Basically, if you have any research question that you want to explore, bring it forth to someone and you'll get the money to be able to do it. And I think that's really unique to our program and pretty unparalleled.
And the other, that I 100% agree. And the other thing I'll say, you know, with regards to research, I know I made it seem like it's really hard to get research done. We do actually have a really good resource that's in Ann Arbor, Music, which I know Apoorv has worked with a lot, and a lot of the residents have worked with. But Music is a statewide initiative, but its headquarters in Ann Arbor, where you know, urologists from across the state submit their data, and it's prospectively maintained, and they look at kidney stones and prostate cancer. And there's a team of statisticians that work at Music, and they make it very easy for residents to get involved with projects and be productive with really not having to do a lot of the grunt work. I will say, like, you know, for example, if you have an interest in a project, there are statisticians there that you can work with, that will send you an Excel file with the tables you need and all the stuff you need. And if you need something changed, you can email them and they'll help you with that. And it makes it a lot easier such that you have this, you have someone who's helping you. The data is already collected. The database is well maintained. You have statisticians that are readily available to help you. And for better or worse, you can get that, you can write it up and present it without having to do a lot of that other stuff. So it does make it the fact that, you may not have as much time to do research. It does help streamline that.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Two quick ones I'm going to hit right off the top. Does UMich feed you? I think as with Lauren's last answer, you probably get a sense that we do. Of course, right now, the whole world is being affected by COVID and our extra expenses. Like we always had Panera every single morning. Sorry, Adam, I was laughing at you going to town on that food. Had Panera every single morning with our conferences. Right now, that's sadly all on pause, but primarily because primarily because we're doing everything virtual.
I'll do my video when I start chowing down.
Yeah, primarily because all of our conferences have gone virtual. So a lot of times, we're from the resident room or home, or from if you have to travel to one of the outpatient surgery centers, people are joining now on Zoom and other things like that. So sadly, right now that's all on pause. It should hopefully be coming back. But prior to that, we were extremely very well fed. And then are there cutoff scores and grades for matching on UMich? No. I think that's a great thing about our program. It actually, it is challenging to review applications without having cutoff scores and grades. But we have committed to that because it allows for a more holistic review. And so there's no like step 1 that's too low. There's no step 2 that's too low. Every application is reviewed by the faculty, and then actually the third years, two of which are behind me, split up the applicant, the people who are ultimately going to be interviewing. They get the ERAS packets from those folks, and the faculty asks them to review the applications as well and compile them into a PowerPoint where you kind of get like a quick overview of where are they from, where are their letters, and kind of main themes, main takeaways, themes from the personal statement. And that's the kind of stuff that we use to kind of get a better sense of who is applying to the program. And then we kind of combine that with interactions. And this year it's going to be virtual interactions. And I think that really ties into most of the questions that are left. It's, without a ways, what should we focus on to increase our chances of matching at UMich? One thing is going to be continued exposure as we try to set up these monthly kind of happy hours to meet with the residents. But I think another part that is really important, and it probably feels uncomfortable, but trying to reach out directly to faculty, particularly if you know that there's an area of either research that you're interested in or, oncology, andrology, FPMRS, et cetera. It's very hard, there's our divisions are listed on our website, but it's very hard to figure out exactly what types of research people are doing. Feel free to email me, and I'm happy to try to connect you with the right person within the department. And do not be afraid to cold email because everyone will carve out some time, because we know that this is not the usual applicant cycle and that we're going to have to put in some extra work after hours.
You didn't mention the money on the car they get from the HO as far as being fed.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and back to the feeding question. The department pays for food at a lot of our conferences. The hospital gives us food based on our call, and as surgical residents, we take a good amount of call. And I don't think I've ever run out of food in terms of having access to being able to buy stuff at our cafeteria. And our cafeteria actually has like 3 or 4 different, hi Sam, 3 or 4 different like local like food vendors that will come in, and they rotate on different days. So we get a little bit of variety in there as well.
And lately with COVID, they've brought in you can buy cartons of milk and bubbly things and stuff like that. So I've used my extra money on that.
Cheese and ham, everything. Yeah.
But I would say as far as cafeterias go, it's not the best food. That would maybe be
but it's
on the cons list.
I actually don't mind. The shawarma's not bad. The grill, they can make
okay.
A lot of good stuff at the grill.
St. Joe's, which you do a rotation as a 4th-year resident, you spend 3 months at our kind of a community hospital that we have, which is a great rotation. But the food there is a lot better and it's a lot cheaper. And there's also free food available for doctors in their doctor's lounge. So you can, and they have a little grocery store that you can go and buy eggs and stuff. So at the end of the month, you can
soap and whatever.
Shopping or whatever.
Living large over there.
Java Joe's, baby.
Yeah. Similar to other stuff we've answered, but without a ways for people outside the region, what should we focus on? How do we get you to know us? I think it's going to be a combination of different things, you know, just like this event, reaching out to people by email,
Liking all of our stuff on Twitter.
Yeah,
obviously
of
retweet
course.
everything.
Yeah, I mean, it is really tough. And I think especially if we could formally kind of get the virtual sub-I approved one way or another, I think that's going to be another really good way to get to, you know, have a somewhat inside look inside the program and be able to have that name recognition where faculty are like, oh yeah, I worked with this person during their virtual sub-I. So a lot of that, unfortunately, is still kind of not set in stone, but we hope to continue to figure it out just like everyone else. Do any of the residents cycle? I think I've seen people cycling. There's not any like avid cyclers that I'm aware of in our department. A lot of the surgery residents, at least one plastic resident, at least one cardiothoracic resident that I know well, does a lot of cycling in the area and goes to the metro park. So there's definitely opportunities, I think, just by
Some
chance.
of our faculty do also.
Yeah.
Dr. Morgan, Dr. Kaffenberger, I think maybe Dr. Harrell.
Yeah, you're right.
There's
Yeah,
definitely some good areas to do it. I know that.
yeah, and good mountain biking trails.
And then step 2 is not required. So I know particularly this cycle, there's a lot of cancellations and a lot of issues. But step 2 is a lot of the applicants last year. I remember not having a step 2 when we reviewed their application, and I didn't even think twice of it. Very vegan friendly. Ann Arbor is very granola is a term people will throw out. So there's like just down the street, there's a place called Detroit Filling Station, which is purely all vegan food. And it's amazing. It's actually one of my favorite places in town. And my wife and I love to eat there and have gotten a lot of food there during COVID because they've also done a lot of really cool initiatives like people who've been furloughed or fired, they've been giving them free meals. And so there's a lot of vegan specific restaurants kind of in the area near town. We have a farmer's market that's finally picking back up after COVID. Yeah, it's a nice little college town. Do you get the sense that the virtual sub-I will be something that we can do while simultaneously doing rotations at our home institution? Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've heard back and forth things. So I know that's why, like, I think the guys from Buffalo came up with the Eurostream thing on Twitter, was as a way to have an opportunity to get plugged in with a resident while still being and doing away rotations. I think part of the delay right now is that the medical school is trying to see if they're able to give students credit for this being a true like rotation or sub-I, so that they can have that on their transcript and they can get that time off from their institution to be able to fully participate. However, I think if we're not able to give like remote access or be able to have some sort of way for you to be able to do some sort of patient care, then it might be something that is done in addition to rotations, but that would be extremely challenging. So I think there's just a lot of questions that remain unanswered.
Yeah, you know, we'll as soon as we have a better idea of exactly what the details of a virtual program, a virtual sub-I would be here, then we can probably give you a more specific answer. You know, in terms of being able to balance 2 rotations at home and in a way at the same time, it's going to be hard to know. I think at least in some capacity, you will be able to. Say, for example, even if you can't make all the didactics or something, or can't make every day of virtual clinic if we do that, at least that we're talking about, you'd be able to do like a virtual grand rounds or something like that. Like those are things that won't necessarily be, like, even if you're busy, that's a reasonable excuse, right? Like, you know, nobody here is going to fault you for having a rotation you have to do. So you'll at least have your time to be able to speak in front of everybody and show yourself.
Nice. I think with that, we did it. We got to all the questions.